the United Kingdom, home to common law, the Westminster system, and some of the world's oldest democratic traditions, the birthplace of the Magna Carta, the rule of law, and the principle that government itself must be accountable to the people. Britain's legacy shaped not just its empire, but the very foundations of liberty across the Western world, from America's constitution to parliamentary democracies everywhere. It's a country that's produced talent like Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Stephen Hawking, and Charles Darwin, all major influences on me leaving Islam at a young age when I knew the penalty for doing so was death. And yet today, I wouldn't be comfortable openly critiquing Islam in the UK. It's a country that has gone from Dawkins and Hitchens shaping debate to Muhammad hijab commanding influence, from a country that once championed truth and reason to one where grooming gangs were ignored, Jews need guards at synagogues, and Islam is too often placed beyond criticism. And that immediately brings me to the Manchester Synagogue attack. Well, as bad as this may sound, this was inevitable. Even a blind man could see this. For 2 years since October 7, the British government, now held hostage to street politics and the fear of upsetting its growing Muslim base at almost 10% of the population, has pretended that chanting for jihad in London was just protest. They've ignored what was brewing under the surface. Sooner or later, words were going to become actions, and Manchester proved that. The attacker wasn't some shadowy outsider smuggled across the border. He was a British citizen, granted asylum as a child, raised in Britain, educated in Britain, a product of the very system that claims to have cracked the code of multiculturalism. And yet, what did that system actually produce? In fact, despite the public statements put out by his family, even his father has proven to be a failure in assimilation. Despite apparently being a surgeon, he has also been living in taxpayer-funded council housing, enjoying every benefit of infidel Britain's generosity. No surprises there. Well, these days, it's perhaps better to call it suicidal empathy. Yet, even he was on record praising Hamas before trying to distance himself from his son's actions. Just have a look at this post, or this one here. That's the uncomfortable truth the government and media will never touch. Ideology, not poverty, drives these acts, and ideology thrives when integration is abandoned in favour of appeasement. And shortly following the Manchester attacks, here's a guy in Nottingham calling for preemptive jihad or strikes against infidels, even name-dropping Tommy Robinson.
What is jihad? Jihad is really removing oppression. Wherever there may be oppression, what people like Tommy Robinson have to realize is that Muslims do not want to be wiped out like the Aborigines. Take up arms and defend yourself, and do preemptive strikes wherever those preemptive strikes, which is offensive jihad, is needed.
It gets worse. The Muslim MPs in the UK who devoured Labour in their last election are now urging the government to declare war on Israel. Ironic when more British Muslims joined that group from Iraq and Syria that I can't name here on YouTube, or the British Armed Forces. Now, before we get to the next part, if you're enjoying the video so far, please remember to give the video a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and consider signing up on Patreon, which comes with a ton of perks. Now, for decades, Britain opened its door without asking whether newcomers would actually adopt British values. The result? Parallel communities where loyalty to Islam almost always outweighs loyalty to the nation, where girls were groomed and in Rotherham while officials stayed silent, where anti-Semitism spiked so much Jews are getting murdered outside synagogues because demographic realities now shape politics more than principles. Demography, as they say, is destiny, and Britain is staring down a future it doesn't want to admit to. And this isn't only about demographics in the abstracts, it's about institutions, the NHS, schools, even universities, bending under the weight of Islamism. If non-Muslim Brits, whether Jews, Christians, or people simply critical of Islam, can't trust the doctor treating them or the teacher guarding their kids, then assimilation hasn't failed quietly, it's failed in plain sight. Take the NHS. Jewish patients have raised concerns about being treated by staff who openly back Hamas or share anti-Semitic bile online. Imagine being ill and wondering if the person charged with your care quietly believes you deserve what Hamas did on October 7. I often say on this channel, for a moment, forget the Middle East. In Britain itself, doctors are treating British patients while cheering for terrorists who would gladly see those same patients dead. That thought should scare you. And if it gets a pass today when it's Jews, I can assure you, especially as someone who's familiar with Islamic scripture, other religious groups are next. There's so much historical precedence behind this, and you won't be able to talk about it. Not in Britain at least, where there is a real chance of the police showing up to your door ready to arrest you for wrongthink. That's exactly why I use Proton VPN and why I think you should too. They're based in Switzerland, outside the reach of US, EU, UK and Australian law. They don't keep logs and are built by the same team behind Proton Mail. When the UK passed its surveillance laws, Proton VPN became the #1 app on the App Store. Their stealth protocol beats censorship firewalls. Secure Core routes your traffic through privacy-first countries, and NetShield blocks trackers before they ever reach you. I've used Proton Mail since Australia announced sweeping surveillance laws last year, and I'm not exaggerating when I say it's now essential. If you want to protect your privacy and support this channel, hit the link below to get up to 60% off Proton VPN. Universities are no different. They've long been hotbeds of Islamist activism dressed up as student politics. Palestine Action, now finally prescribed, had already burrowed its way into charities, lecture halls, and even public buildings before the government belatedly acted. That delay wasn't an accident, it was cowardice. Institutions have bent the knee so often that extremists stopped fearing them altogether. But institutions only bend because politicians set the tone. And the hypocrisy on display after Manchester was staggering. The same leaders who spent 2 years excusing chants for jihad on London streets suddenly rushed to microphones to condemn the synagogue attack. Keir Starmer called it abhorrent. Add to the list Shabana Mahmood, who attended protests where globalizing the Intifada was chanted, and people like Sadiq Khan, who've built their careers on this perverted idea of failed multiculturalism. But what good are statements after the blood has already dried? What good is outrage from a government that refused to confront extremism until people were lying dead in Manchester? Labour's problem is simple. It is hostage to the very demographic forces it helped create. Britain's Muslim vote has become a bloc large enough to make or break elections, and politicians know it. That's why extremism is tolerated until it spills into violence. That's why anti-Semitism spikes are brushed off as protests. The Manchester attack wasn't a shock to anyone paying attention. It was the bill finally coming due for decades of cowardice in institutions, in politics, and in the very culture that once prided itself on defending freedom. And you can tell people are frustrated. Take a look at this.
You have allowed this to happen. You have blood in your hands. You are all guilty. And all you have allowed 2 Islamists in Manchester on the street. You have allowed it. You are all guilty. You do not want this meeting here today. You do not think.
The other issue with all these politicians coming out of the woodwork crying about anti-Semitism is none of them actually spoke about the root of the attack. They all talked about anti-Semitism or protecting Jews, for example. To that I ask, protect them from whom? What is the idea that's causing anti-Semitism? What is making the mere sight of the English flag so offensive? What is driving the spread of Sharia courts, the forcing of halal meat on people who don't want to eat it, the calls to prayer in once working class towns, and even the NHS now trying to present cousin marriage as a positive thing? It's the same idea and the same religion that has driven violence on these shores for decades. From the Salman Rushdie affair to the London bombings to Manchester and beyond, Islamist ideology keeps showing up as the common thread. Between 2011 and 2022, nearly 70% of those in custody for terrorism offences in Britain were Muslim. The overwhelming driver of extremism in the country has been Islamist extremism. Watching from afar, Britain has become the prime example of what happens when mass immigration from Islamic countries is allowed without integration or accountability. For decades, politicians and institutions insisted it was all manageable, but the evidence says otherwise. You can see the consequences in your streets, in your schools, in your politics, and in Manchester. If this continues, Britain risks the kind of fragmentation that tore apart places like Yugoslavia or Lebanon. Parallel communities, sectarian politics, and a society that no longer believes in a shared future. None of this ends well. The window to avoid that fate is closing fast, and only very tough choices will save it. You can already see the signs, an immediate example being If an election were held today, Nigel Farage would be the Prime Minister. That is how cornered many in Britain feel. Tough choices mean overhauling immigration systems to put culture, values and loyalty to Britain at the centre. It means actively de-radicalising and shutting down homegrown Islamist movements that preach separatism and violence. It means stopping subservience to globalist organisations and NGOs who are on a warpath to destroy countries like the UK. And it means restoring free criticism of Islam to the mainstream, the kind of fearless debate once championed by British thinkers and now left to ex-Muslims and a handful of critics who are ironically now shouted down as racists or Islamophobes. Make no mistake, my dear viewers, this is a civilizational fight. That is not hyperbole. Britain either finds the courage to face it now, or it will be consumed by it later.
In the neon haze of a broken dawn, steel towers hum, but the wild runs on. A shadow moves through the circus below, half machine, half